Welcome back to World War II TV, everyone. And we are off on one of our customary deep dives into the German bunkers and defenses on Omaha Beach, specifically this time, WN64 and 65. Michael Akkerman has done all this amazing research despite never having actually set foot in France, but hopefully we can change that. But I will bring Michael in now. How are you, Mike, today, my friend?
Doing well, thank you, Paul. Yes, it's very true. I have never been to Normandy, never been to France, any of those places at all. But I do a ton of very intricate studying of photographs and things like that. And I'm a serious nerd when it comes to this stuff. So it's just how it goes. But I mean, I do want to eventually end up over there because, I want to go on your tours and such. I want to, of course, see all these things I've been studying basically my whole life. So, I do eventually want to make it over there.
I think I've pondered, since you started doing these shows with me, a couple of years ago, I've pondered how you do it. And of course, I'm an advocate for you've got to visit battlefields. There's nothing like standing as I've done at the remains of Remagen Bridge or Colditz Castle. But at the same time, what you've been forced to do by having not been here is look at the other sources, whereas I've allowed the location to guide me. And right. So, there's what I can see. So that's the story behind that. And the books are about what often can be seen now, whereas you've done that deeper dive, as we said in the introduction, of going into the stages of the photographic evidence, the information that was being compiled, and you've uncovered stuff because I think you've had a clean access to it, if that makes sense.
I would say, yeah, probably. I think that, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, what I find with a lot of research and stuff like that is that there is a lot of attention directed towards books. And, of course, that's great. That's kind of, the obvious place to go when it comes to wanting to study something, right off the bat. But I find that not as much attention is paid to like original documents. Like people, average people aren't going to just, go to archives and such like that. And then also people kind of, I don't know what it is, but don't really love to study photographs. They want a photograph kind of to slap to this thing that they read about, but they don't like say, okay, now let's go in and study every little bit of that and see what every little thing is and dissect it. What is that thing? What is this? What is this? When was this photo taken? Okay. And such like that.
I think it's because us oldie people, we started with like the green books with those grainy kind of lithographic printed pixel versions of the photos where there wasn't much detail. Yeah. And, we've tried to keep up with technology, but now there are available in these massive, great, TIFF files and massive resolution images, which of course you can blow up. And then you can, as you've done, play around with contrast and things like that. Okay, what is that there? And also as the networking, that's the other thing that's happened is that you're in touch with Veronique, who's joined us down the channel, and Francois Matti and people like that, and myself, others, and Niels for the German side of things. And it's all putting the resources together. And suddenly you're building up layers. I guess it's like a detective case. But anyway, enough of the preamble. We've got your presentation, which I'll hand over to you. And folks, the deal with Michael, sort of fire away with comments and questions. And I have to perfect my pretending I know already some of the stuff Michael will undoubtedly reveal to me. And there's, I will learn. And that tells you something about Michael's knowledge in this. So over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. So yes, today we are looking at, again, the German strong points of Omaha Beach, and specifically we're looking at La Ruquet, which is also known as Exit E1 of Omaha Beach. And it is probably, I would say, the most photographed area of Omaha Beach. It is the one that usually in books you see photographs of with the big bunker that has the anti-tank gun in it, which we'll get to. But, I wanted to actually break down this one and say, okay, even though it was the most photographed, what was it exactly? How significant was it in terms of the overall defense of Omaha Beach? So we're going to be looking at La Ruquet, which was flanked by the German nests WN64 and WN65. So let's get into this. So obviously here we have Omaha Beach. Now, most people who are just, basically study World War II history or study Normandy and all that stuff will know that Omaha Beach was broken into sectors by the Americans. So you have, Charlie sector, dog sector, easy sector, and fox sector. And then these are all broken up into their own little sectors. So when the Americans were approaching Omaha Beach, this is how they saw Omaha Beach. So they were divided by all of these sectors. However, the Germans obviously, that's not how it was for them. They had their own system of breaking up their defenses and such along the beach. The actual beach itself, when it came to the Germans, was called both by the French and then by the Germans, La Plage d'Or, which, we've talked about this before. La Plage d'Or, that's the name of the beach, the Golden Beach or the Golden Sand. And overlooking the Golden Beach were these three towns right here, which were Beerville-sur-Mer, Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, and Colville-sur-Mer. Now, the Germans broke up their strong points into basically clusters around these towns. And again, we've talked about this in previous episodes. I'm just doing a little recap here. But so we have Stützpunkt. They're broken into Stützpunkt, and Stützpunkt means strong point. It's basically like a large sector of defense. So Stützpunkt Beerville, Stützpunkt Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, and then Stützpunkt Colville-sur-Mer, also Beerville-sur-Mer, means of the sea. So that's how they broke their strong points up. And then these strong points were made up of Widerstandsnests, which are resistance nests. And these were all kind of clustered around these little areas that led off the beach, the Strandausgangs, or the beach exits. Strandausgangs is what the Germans would have called them. And they were the roads that led from the beach inland. And there were 5 of them along all of Omaha Beach. And the one that we're going to be looking at today is La Ruquet. The La Ruquet or La Ruquet Valley, basically right in the middle of the entire beach. So here is a contemporary satellite photo of La Ruquet today. You have the big, cemetery over here, and then you have this bunker over here. It's now a monument and all this stuff. If you visit Omaha Beach, you're probably going to end up here at some point.
And there's more since that aerial image, because there's now the divers and the Navy
that
down there as well. So so it's as always with an 80th anniversary just in our shadow. There's more stuff since.
Right, more monuments, right. But so now it's all, and of course there are lots of houses here. No, tons of houses you can see now. But at the time there were hardly any houses. So we're going to go back to 1942. This is an aerial from 1942 where we can see that La Ruquet is not well populated. We've looked at like Les Moulins before in previous episodes where there were a ton of houses. As a big hamlet. There were not so many around this area. And also La Ruquet is still part of Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer. And we're going to kind of get into some of the kind of the locations of what was considered what here in a little bit, but this is still part of Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer. So here we go. So that's my own map of it, back in 1942. This is my own map that I've created, and we're going to be going off of this as we go. So the big thing to note about La Ruquet is that really the major house that was in there was called Les Sans Vacances. I think I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. I'm not French at all, so I apologize. But it means the healthy holidays in French, and it was a summer camp for people, like for families and such. Like, a lot of Parisians would come to the Normandy coast on vacations and such, and their kids would attend this summer camp right here. It was this big house. And it was managed by the Saint Pierre des Chalots in Paris, which is a church. And so they managed this from Paris, this big summer camp. So kids from Paris, on their summer vacations could come out here and do sports and run along the beaches and such and do all these kinds of activities. Now, there are a lot of pre-war photos of stuff like this from like the early 1900s all the way to the 1920s. This is a really active place when it came to this sort of thing. Again, there are not many houses here. This summer camp is what populated La Ruquet before the war. So that's the big house right there is the big summer camp. And then there was a guest house also off to the side for families to stay in. If when they were coming from Paris to stay there or from wherever else, they could stay in that house. And the house was known as La Abri Quartier, which, from what I understand, means like the seaside shelter in French, something along those lines. Yep. Yeah, and this was a guest house for les Saint Vacances, so families could come and stay here. Not very big. I don't think it could hold many families, but it was there nonetheless. It was something to stay in. And then the final house that's in the whole valley is the parish house, and this is where the camp instructor from Saint Pierre de la Chaux from Paris would stay when he would live there. And I've only been able to find one photo of this house, and it is a 1943 reconnaissance photo. This is the only photo I've been able to find. This is very zoomed in right here. And you can see this is the house right here. And then off to the side, there was this little stucco shed, which stored various things for sports activities and such. And that'll become kind of important later on. So anyway, that's La Ruquet. And then also another part is one of the old customs houses. We've talked about this in previous episodes. The old, customs houses for guards during the Napoleonic era. There was one of those also there, and it was pretty much in ruins. And this is, again, in the background of a photo. I've only been able to find this when it comes to it. It was nothing, basically, just some old ruins. It wasn't anything. But so that's it for La Ruquet when it comes to what it was before the war. And it also had an old canal running through the center of it. As we talked about with Les Moulins and stuff like that, like the beach, when it would get to high tide, there were some channels from the shingle that could lead inland to power windmills and such like that. And La Ruquet was sometimes also known as like the Ruquet Canal, because down the center was this old canal, and you can see traces of it in this aerial photo right here. So it had that running through the center of it.
We had a comment from Terry down about an odd place for a customer's house, but if you carry on walking east from Omaha, you get to 2 or 3 more before you get to Port-en-Bessin. The remains of, there's one about every, I'm going to say about a mile and a half, and I guess it's just to do with they were located near roads that ran, or tracks, inlets that ran inland. And I can think of like 5 or 6 in that kind of area. So they're quite common. But yeah, it seems obviously the need for customs was strong back in the day, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting, during the Napoleonic era, like that was their own way of kind of guarding the coast. And, kind of keeping a lookout. It's in a way almost kind of ironic, because now we're jumping ahead to the Germans occupying the area. But back then, with the French during, during the Napoleonic Wars and such, they would be stationed in those houses, and that's what they're for. And a lot of them, and not a lot of them, I should say, but I do know there are some that still exist today that are like basically almost falling off some of the cliffs.
Yeah, there's at least 3, I think, that I can think of between Grand Camp and Saint-Honorine-des-Pertes. Yeah.
Right. So now we're jumping into the war. Going to jump into the spring of 1942, when the Germans come in and start to establish the Atlantic Wall. Now, as we've also talked about in previous episodes, before these German defenses became what we know them as today in terms of what they were on D-Day, they were a different designation. There was not Stützpunkt Saint Laurent, Stützpunkt Colleville, and stuff like that. Instead, they were numbered, and the one that we're looking at for La Ruquet is Stützpunkt 28. And you can see it right here on this map from 1942, 28A and B. So Stützpunkt 28A and Stützpunkt 28B. This is what WN64 and WN65 were called before they became that. So now what's interesting about the way that the Germans set up these nests before the end of 1943 is that, and you can notice this in other places, they will put the defenses down on the beach, and then they will put other ones like up on the bluff right behind it. So in terms of the Ruquet Valley right here, you have this big valley coming inland. This is obviously something that needs to be guarded. So WN28A is put up on the eastern plateau up here, with overlooking everything. But then down here on the beach, you have WN28B, and this is kind of what's covering what's directly down on the beach. So WN28A has more of, mortars and, a field gun and things like that. But WN28B has the machine guns and all that kind of stuff made to engage like directly at anything coming towards this. And you can see this also at Les Moulins and, other places like that, this kind of tactic. So WN28A, the first thing that's put in WN28A, obviously they cut this big trench in here, and they utilize a French Brandt MLE 2731, it's a 3.2-inch mortar. It's not German, it's French. And this is another thing you're going to see is captured French weaponry and such. Put in an open pit right here. And that's kind of one of the main things of WN28A. Another thing is, one second, Zwillingshakel 36 anti-aircraft gun. Now, a lot of people, when they think of a German anti-aircraft gun, they think of the 20 millimeter, like the Flakvieler or something like that, like the quad kind of thing. However, when it comes to the Atlantic Wall, I find that the Zwillingshakel 36, which is a dual MG34 setup, was far more common when it came to guarding these nests, and these were in place all the way up to D-Day. So you see these a lot along the coast. And there were a number of them along Omaha Beach as well. We looked at one previously at WN62. But so that was there, right? Basically the heart of WN28A. And then also, of course, you have the Velblek, which is, a sheet metal troop shelter. And these are also very common along the Atlantic Wall. This is where the guys who were stationed at the nest could stay. And then you have Unterschlupf, which is a battle shelter. So if there was, an air raid going on, the guys could run inside and hide in this thing. And you see these also a lot along the resistance nests. And then, of course, the main thing of WN28A is a field gun position right at the tip of this, right at the corner of this plateau. Now, I've seen some literature say that this was likely one of the Belgian 7.5 centimeter FK235s that eventually ended up at WN74. I haven't been able to find any photographs of it or anything like that to prove that it was, but that's what I've heard in terms of when they first established this field gun position, that this was probably one of these Belgian field guns. And again, that's also something that you see along the coast, these repurposed guns.
And I think it just reconfirms what we've talked about previously, is that for us watching this, we have this idea as Omaha, of course, as being one of the 5 landing beaches, the Americans, beginning their journey to liberate Europe from that location. But back in 1942, as Niels has said, the Germans are not looking at Normandy with the same focus on the same areas as we would now. They're focusing on Cherbourg and Caen and things like that, and they're not. The fact that they're putting French mortars and old stuff there is that then they're struggling to get enough equipment. They're putting it at a different level of priority than perhaps we, with our knowledge of what happened there later, would have done ourselves.
That's funny. Like, that's one thing that really grinds my gears when it comes to a lot of documentaries, is that when they want to talk about Normandy and D-Day and, the invasion, stuff like that, they always show like propaganda footage of like battery tote and things
that infuriates me, Mike. I mean, the Germans wheeling out these big 18-inch shells on these, and you go, oh, fuck off. That's not
that wasn't at Normandy. What are you doing? It's so stupid. But and then of course, like, people say, oh well, it's just an impression to show. It's like, yeah, but then you talk to people and they say, well, they had those big guns, I've seen the footage. Now we're going on a rant here, but we could keep going. But yeah, that always grinds my gears. Now, moving on from WN28A up on the plateau, we're going to go down to the beach to WN28B. And again, this is a very common way to set up these WNs before late 1943, is to put everything kind of down on the beach, just head on, basically. So Schartenprogramm, which is a battle trench. This big kind of elaborate thing is dug all along the sand here, along the shelf. We Americans always refer to this kind of area as the shelf. The Germans referred to it as the high beach. So you have the beach, and then you have the high beach above that, which is beyond the shingle. It's still sand, but it's a little more granule and not quite as loose. You can actually build some stuff on it. Obviously, there were houses there. And now this photo right here is not of the trench system of WN28B, but it shows you what these kind of things were. They would usually, put camouflage over it, chicken wire. You can see on this trench right here, this example, there's chicken wire all over this thing. Example of that. And then also Schützenlake and I forgot the pronunciation of that one right there. But that second one means open observation post. Now, that's another thing that you see along, a lot of these places are these open observation posts and things like that, and shooting positions. And, for machine guns and rifles, either or. This right here is also not, let me go back there. This is also not the position of WN28B right here, but it is similar to how it would have been, all of this trench dug into this, sand and machine gun positions and such. And here's another example of how these sort of things would have looked. And there's another example. And when it came to the western part of WN28B, right next to La Bricatière, the house which is still left there, by the way, being utilized by the Germans that are stationed at WN28B, they installed a concrete Tobruk LC-116, which could have an MG34 mounted on a ringstand Lafette, which is this sort of thing right here, the shield. You see that in some of these positions. I think we've looked at some in previous ones at WN62. But so that was there for WN28B. In terms of a fortified machine gun position. And then you have the ring stand 1694, which is a very common thing also for this position. This one right here is not the one of WN28B. This is the one at WN66, which we looked at in a previous episode. And but it's exactly the same of what this kind of thing would have been. It's a big concrete a kind of horseshoe almost fortification meant to protect a 5-centimeter KWK 39 anti-tank gun. The one here was an L60, and L60 refers to the barrel length here. When you see this long barrel with the muzzle brake, that's an L60 barrel. So and again, you see these kind of guns along the coast a lot. There's not a lot of documentation on them, I've realized, but they were very common along the Atlantic Wall. These things, it's basically what it is. It's the gun from a Panzer III tank that's been taken out and put into like a swivel. That's all it is, really. It's straight up the gun from a Panzer III taken out and put into a swivel anti-tank gun roll. So really interesting. I find these types of guns really interesting, and you see them along Normandy all over the place. And then on the far eastern part of WN28B, you have a concrete pad that they laid for a PAC 38, another 5-centimeter gun, but this one could actually be moved around. This is the kind of one for an infantry role where you could, move it around and such on wheels. So on the far left there, on the western side, you have the KWK 39, and then on the eastern side, you have the PAC 38. So 2 guns protecting both sides. Okay, another interesting thing about WN28B, and I'm not sure if this was actually part of the nest at all, but one thing that is interesting, you can see this all the way back in 1942, is that at some point there was a battery of 4 field guns up on the plateau of where WN65 eventually ended up, and you can see these positions here all the way, from 1942 up to 1944. I've never seen an aerial photo where you can actually see guns there. I'm guessing they put them there and then eventually got rid of them, like sometime in 1942, because aerial photographs from 1942 onwards, I've never seen them where the guns are actually there. But these were likely Skoda 8-centimeter FKM 17s. That's what I've heard in terms of what these likely were. And these are, again, other kind of guns that ended up at other places like WN74. But just kind of interesting, Okay, so now we're moving on from 1942, and we're getting into the reestablishment of the German positions. And this is where we're going to look at Stützpunkt Colleville instead of Stützpunkt 28. Stützpunkt Colleville and then Stützpunkt Ruquet. Kind of interesting here. So in February 1943, you have this map show up. This map right here is dated February 1943, where we can see the new establishment of the Stützpunkts. Well, we have Stützpunkt Vierville-sur-Mer, Stützpunkt Saint-Laurent, and Stützpunkt Colville-sur-Mer. And we can also see that all of the positions here are now numbered in the way we know them today. And you can see WN64 and WN65 right here as part of Stützpunkt Colleville. However, at some point, it's so weird. I don't know what it is, but the Ruquet Valley kind of is, it's never clear whether it belongs to what strong point. It's technically the area is part of Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, but it's very much associated with Colleville-sur-Mer, like with Stützpunkt Colleville, WN62.
Well, that's even is an issue today in terms of how the tourism board works, because
right.
the roads that access the beach aren't necessarily going straight from the inland coastal road to the beach. So a road might start in Colville and end up in Saint Laurent, or vice versa. And so I'm imagining when the Germans are kind of administrating things in terms of even like their post, that one of the points would be technically in Colville-sur-Mer. The position the men billeted might have actually been Saint Laurent-sur-Mer. So you get that kind of issue even today with the way that it's not so much Rivière-sur-Mer and Saint Laurent-sur-Mer. It's the boundary between Saint Laurent and Colville is still kind of confusing today.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be. And I've been confused many times. But this, again, going back to confusion, though, this map right here is dated June 1943. And you can see Stützpunkt Vierville and Stützpunkt Colleville are here. But Saint Laurent isn't even labeled. I don't know. Either they forgot or it was being reestablished and they hadn't quite,
they haven't decided what heading to put it under. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And at some point, this map, I don't have a date for this map, but the Ruquet Valley is its own Stützpunkt at some point, which is called Stützpunkt Ruquebach. So at some point in 1943, the Ruquet Valley was its own Stützpunkt, which is kind of interesting. Again, I haven't been able to lock down the dates specifically on that, but just really interesting studying these maps. Like, oh, at some point it was its own strong point. Weird. But throughout 1943, this is where WN64 and WN65 become established, and they start to add a bit more and take away some things and start moving things around. And one of the first things to go is Les Cent Vacances. The big summer camp house here is bulldozed to the ground completely, is taken down completely, and that is to make room for Fields of Fire from WN64, and then also to just use more resources, to be able to take all of the resources from that building and use them for future, constructions and such. And that's another thing that we've talked about that was common along these positions. So Les Saint Vacances is destroyed, but L'Abri Quartier here on the east is left intact. In fact, the Germans install an observation post up on top. We looked at when we looked at Les Moulins, we could see that the house, the Golden Sands house of WN66, Les Sebloudons, had also had an observation post at the top. So they did a similar thing here. Instead of doing it on Les Saint Vacances, though, they did it on L'Abri Quartier, probably because this was a smaller house and the Germans were probably already using it, and it was not in the way of fire from WN64.
Because you wonder whether there's any collaboration and conversations going on between, for example, the German engineers in this sector and the German engineers, I don't know, Courcelles-sur-Mer or Hermanville or something, because there's not like a standard policy. Sometimes, because someone asked about Peter O'Connell asked about the camouflage, how well camouflaged were the Widerstandsnest positions? And the interesting thing is sometimes they try and incorporate a Widerstandsnest within buildings on some of the beaches. Other times they leave it completely out in the open without any attempt to kind of conceal it and just go for a thick wall defending it. So there obviously isn't a blanket policy for the coast. They're thinking about each area, and there's discussions going on between engineers and, okay, well, this one we'll try and hide. And in this case, they're using sometimes they're using the buildings, other times they're removing them. It's it
just depends. It's spontaneous, and it just really depends on the situation. That's what I have a lot of people ask me, like, okay, what did they do when it came to blah blah blah? Like, and there's like, well, honestly, there's no general answer. It depends on a number of circumstances. Yeah. But for example, we've looked at WN72 before, which is on the western side of Omaha Beach, and the big bunker that houses the 88 millimeter gun in there. That was built inside, the ruins of an old hotel to camouflage it. So various things like that. So sometimes you get it where they paint up bunkers to look like houses. Sometimes they build bunkers in old ruins, and sometimes they use just houses for, to keep troops in, for observation posts, whatever. And in this case, L'Abri Quartier was left to house the troops and also to act as an observation post because it was fairly tall. Okay. So now in 1943, June 1943, we're going to look at what we've already covered from a different perspective here. These are aerial photographs taken from June 1943. Now we see way back here, this is WN64. And we can see all those positions we talked about, the Velblek, the Unterschlumpf, the field gun positions, the Zwillingsakel 36, and the Brandt MLE mortar position right there. So it's funny, WN64, it's not nearly as focused on as much as WN65. I'm not talking about research, but in terms of the actual development of it, it's pretty much left as it was when it was WN28A, all the way through from 1942 to 1944. There is not a whole lot of development of WN64, but there is some that we'll cover. So moving on here, we're moving west, and then we can see the ruins of Les Saint-Vacances right there. It's completely destroyed, gone, big gash on the ground there where it used to be. And now we have WN65 right here, still along the shingle up on the High Beach sector. We can see there the 5-centimeter PAC 38 on the concrete platform. And then we can see the various fighting and observation posts along the battle trench. There's La Abri Cartier still in place, and you can see the observation post on the rear of it. And the Tobruk LC116 there, and then the ring stand 1694 for the KWK 39 gun right here. All of that is still in place. We're not utilizing the plateaus yet when it comes to WN65. Everything is still down on the beach in 1943. When we looked at Les Moulins, there was a lot of development from 1943 to 1944, tons of stuff going on. It's really interesting, despite WN64 and WN65 being quite prominent in terms of, like Omaha Beach imagery, they were not... There was not a lot of development. They were not grandiose, big positions. They were fairly small, in comparison to something like WN68, WN67, and then the other one like WN62, obviously, which was a very big one. So just kind of interesting. And as we keep going here in these aerial photographs, we keep going west, we eventually see those abandoned gun battery positions still sitting up there. Again, you can still see these positions all the way up till D-Day, but I've never been able to find photos of actual guns sitting on them. All right. Going on to the expansion of WN64 here in 1943. Again, not a whole lot, but there are some things that are added to it. On the eastern side of the nest, the Germans eventually add 2 Tobruk 58C positions for machine guns. These are mainly to guard the rear of the nest. So if any kind of force got up beyond the bluffs and was coming along the escarpment, was coming up behind the nest, you have these Tobruks behind to guard. That's another thing that you see a lot with these WNs along the coast, is that they have machine gun Tobruks at the rear to defend them from a rear attack. And that's an example of what they would have been like. And then you also have additional battle shelters added for these crews in here. So, in case, these are mostly like for air raids and such. If there's bombing going on, these guys could run inside these things. So yeah, those are added along with, the trench. And okay, so then in late 1943, there's the Schartenprogramm, which is Hitler, because of all of the bombing that's been going on through 1942 and 43, Hitler decides that the guns now, we're going to order that all these guns have to be, when it comes to artillery, field guns, anti-tank guns, all that stuff, they have to be in some kind of casemate to protect them, because bombs are, people are bombing everything all the time. So the Schartenprogramm in late 1943 is passed, which eventually reaches Organization Todt. And that is that, okay, all field guns now, we are not having them out in the open anymore. So this is why in 1942 and 1943, you see all of these open gun positions along the coast here, where you have, like the PAC 38 just sitting on a concrete platform and such. But then after late 1943, everything is starting to be put into casemates and put into bunkers and put into log improvised bunkers and such, because that was the order. Okay, if it's an anti-tank gun, it has to be protected. So kind of an interesting thing about the development of these.
I think it's also tying in as well, where there's lots of promises being made by the German High Command about what's going to be happening, and I'm sure German commanders are being told they're going to be getting the latest guns. They'll be here next week, and of course, the Germans are making lots of promises across multiple theaters by 1943 in production and things like that. So you see platforms being built in places that never end up getting used, because I assume that the weapon they were told they were going to get, that they prepared for, ends up not turning up, and they get given something out of the old like when you're at PT at school and you get given something from the lost and found. That kind of Germans are kind of doing that kind of stuff, aren't they? Well, we haven't got what you ordered, but we've got this, you know.
Right. No, that's a great analogy, actually, because that is absolutely it. And we're gonna keep looking here. You're gonna see more of those secondhand, obsolete kind of guns being used along here. So but yeah, the Schartenprogramm in late 1943 is basically, okay, we take all of our big guns and we have to now put them in fortifications. So no more having things sit out in the open, which is again why you see those 5-centimeter KWK 39 swivel guns in those ring stand positions along the beach. You're not going to see those anymore past late 1943, except for ones like at WN66 and such, which never were able to be utilized elsewhere. They were working on it, but it never got to that phase. So in terms of the Schartenprogramm right here, because of that, then the Germans at WN64 start to build an R612 casemate at the very corner of that plateau right there. And so this becomes a big construction site, and that's a blueprint for an R612 casemate right there, meant to hold a 75 millimeter gun, whether it's, you know, a Skoda gun or, you know, any kind of other German gun. It's meant to hold a 75 millimeter gun, or 7.5 centimeter, I should say. Now, what's interesting, though, is that while this casemate is being constructed, there happens to be a Soviet 76.2 millimeter M1927 regimental gun right next to it, just to the right of it, in a temporary position that's sitting there to fill the role as a gun. I haven't been able to find if they were actually going to put that specific gun in that casemate, or if it was just there as a temporary, you know, role. But yeah, there was a captured Soviet M1927 regimental gun sitting there next to the construction site, and that casemate was never finished. There is that's what I'm talking about right there. That's the Soviet gun that was sitting there as the field gun roll, possibly going to be eventually put in that R612 that was never finished. Okay, and then some fighting positions are added as well along the escarpment here facing the sea. We have the Doppelschützenloch, which is a double trench for fighting right here. You can have two riflemen sitting in this, and you see this kind of horseshoe pattern a lot. Sometimes it's used for a machine gun, so a machine gun can, you know, traverse back and forth. Other times it's made for two riflemen, so one guy sits on the left, one guy sits in the right, and they're able to take up a position that way. And then also you have the addition of an improvised machine gun pillbox. And this is a German diagram right here. I use a lot of original German diagrams that these guys would have been supplied with. So these diagrams I'm showing are original German building plans, basically, for these things, to show these guys how to build them. That's why I wanted to include these. So you also have this improvised MG pillbox that's added to WN64, and it's facing the east. And I have not been able to find out what kind of gun was in it, but there was an enfilading improvised machine gun position there. All right. And now moving on to the much more interesting one, WN65 right here. Again, excuse me. What the hell? Sorry. Going back to 1943, everything starts to get moved from down along the beach, like how it was originally, established. Now we're going to start utilizing those plateaus and moving everything from the high beach sector all the way back to the plateaus. And we're going to be utilizing those plateaus. We've gone over that in previous episodes. So the Germans in 1943 start to really expand WN65, and they move a lot of things up onto that plateau, and they dig their own battle trench. And by 1944, this whole area right here is kind of like WN68, which we looked at before, where you have this corner of this plateau, and then there's almost this horseshoe trench system that runs along it. And here we have a more detailed view of it. So the Kampfgraben, which is the battle trench, obviously is dug, and this was camouflaged and buried. We can see that in aerial photographs. If we zoom in, again, that's that example again, just to show what that was like. Again, that's not WN65, but it's just it is what it would have been like.
Mhm.
And then the entrance to this system, to this trench system, was all the way over here on the edge of the plateau. And from what I can tell in aerial photographs, it was buried. This photograph is not of WN65, but it is. This is an American engineer right here, but it is. It gets the idea across of where, of what it was like. I haven't been able to lock down where this photo was specifically taken, but this is what these underground trenches would have been like once you got into them. So the Germans along the battle trench here, they install troop shelters and more battle shelters to hide in. You have another Velblek shelter, which is the sheet metal shelter. Large wooden troop shelters up at the edge here to house the men of the nest, and then the battle shelter right there to take cover. And that's a Velblek shelter diagram, how that was built. This is the Velblek over here on the right. And in the center, there appeared to be a mortar Tobruk. It was similar to an LC125, but the diameter of the embouchure apparently was a little smaller. That's what I've read anyway. I've never been able to find photographs of this thing. And I've also read that it contained a Granatwerfer 36, which is this type of mortar right here. Very heavy thing that you're not technically, but it's designed so you can carry it around. But this thing was famously heavy as hell. And then along the trench, you have 3 improvised machine gun pillboxes. You have 2 up here facing the west. This is again very similar to like what you see at WN68. 2 improvised pillboxes facing the west and enfilading fire. There's their fields of fire, and then you have one back here that's facing the Ruquet Valley itself. Very similar to Les Moulins and like the Vierville descent, where you have those kind of dog leg shaped pillboxes, but these were not concrete fortified. These were just improvised. So the same kind of idea that you see at WN68, but not WN67 and WN68, but not fortified concrete positions.
And it's worth mentioning that the myths show I did about Omaha is an improvised machine gun position that we can see in photographic evidence does not necessarily mean that there was a machine gun A in there ever, and B that it was ever firing and did any damage. And these are a house that has 4 bedrooms doesn't necessarily mean there are 4 people occupying those bedrooms. I think that's a weird analogy, but I think we must always remind ourselves that just because a German position has the capability of having something in it, an accommodation bunker houses 16 people, does not necessarily mean always that there are 16 people in it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's more difficult to determine how many people were in a lot of these positions. Unfortunately, WN62 is obviously the one where there seems to be a lot more documentation on, who was there and such and how many people were there. But, in some cases, there were positions that weren't used at all. So, absolutely. You're sorry. Did my screen get messed up, or can you still see it?
No, I'm still seeing it. Yeah, we're here. Everything's good. Everything's good. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Sorry. But anyway, no momento. Sorry, I lost something here. I'm trying to pull something up again.
No worries. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. And folks, by the way, thank you for those who've already contributed to Michael's GoFundMe. It's going up. Watching it. And we are going to try and get Michael here. And so we can, as people are saying in the sidebar, so he can walk the ground himself and we can make that happen.
I would absolutely, that would be a dream come true. But all right, so let's move on here. So we have the improvised machine gun pillboxes here. And again, yeah, it's impossible to know what was there or how many people were there exactly, but that's what I've been able to find in terms of photographic evidence, aerial photographs and such. Now, I told you when I was going to do this that I was going to have some artwork to show you. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do any traditional paintings like I usually do for previous episodes, but I was able to whip up some digital stuff to show you. Now, what I wanted to do for this one, because everyone talks about the concrete positions and such, not a lot of people seem to talk about these improvised positions. However, these improvised positions, these improvised wooden pillboxes that were underground and camouflage and such, these were far more prevalent than the concrete fortifications were along Omaha Beach. Obviously, everyone, thinks of the concrete positions more because they're basically everlasting. I mean, they're still there to this day. You can see them. But after D-Day, all of these improvised wooden positions would have been torn up and torn out and all that stuff. But so they don't survive the test of time, but they were there and they were much more prevalent than people like to think. So I decided to do this little cutaway here that showed what one of these improvised machine gun pillboxes would have been like on the escarpment of WN65. Now, you might notice that the gunner right here, he's using a French Mac MLE 1931 machine gun, fortress machine gun that would have been first used on the Maginot Line in 1940. Well, the Germans, we've gone over this also, the Germans used these guns, when they could, and they would adopt them into infantry roles where they would put them in, as infantry machine guns, a lot of them along the static, positions along the coast. So there are many cases where you see these machine guns, these French Mac MLE 1931 machine guns ending up along the Atlantic Wall. Now, I'm not just including this in this improvised position here because I think, I want to be a contrarian to what kind of German machine guns would have been used. But
yes,
there is
you do want to be a contrarian. Don't pretend. Don't come in here with you wanting to conform to. We are here because we don't conform to Omaha mythology.
All right, fine. I admit it. Yes, but there is logic in it as well. It's not just to be an asshole. Yeah. It is there is a photograph that's taken of the escarpment of the trenches along WN65 after D-Day, close to one of these positions, and you can see magazines for this machine gun outside one of those outside the trenches. I'll eventually show that, but so that has to mean that one of these pillboxes housed one of these French Mac 31 machine guns. Now you can see with this one right here too that these were, when these were designed as fortress machine guns for the Maginot Line, they weren't intended to be light machine guns in infantry roles. So when the Germans got a hold of them, they modified them to be that. And as you can see, it has this kind of janky improvised bipod attached to it, and that's based on photos I've seen of these kind of things where they would weld on these kind of crude bipods made out of whatever bar stock they had around. A lot of the times they would install a shoulder stock on the end of this thing. Sometimes they wouldn't. I've seen both cases where, sometimes these guns, they have these, again, janky looking shoulder stocks attached to them, but in some cases they don't. And they're just like this right here, how I depicted this one. But when it came to these improvised machine gun positions, this is how they would have been on the inside. And this is based off, again, photographs and blueprints of these positions that were given to these guys to build these things. You have this shelf right here to mount the machine gun. You have a wooden crate right here that catches the rounds as they come out of the gun right here, because, you don't want everything just spilling all over the floor. So this crate right here would fill up with spent casings. And then the second guy in the machine gun team, he would eventually take that crate once that's filled up with rounds, go to the back of the thing and throw it out like, almost like he's bailing water. He'd throw out those rounds, come back in and put it under the gun and start all over again. And the crate also had a ventilator system right here. It has this vent pipe going down into the position and is placed over the wooden crate. And the wooden crate was usually an empty crate for like rifle rounds. That's why I depicted a Petronkesten 88 right here. You can see the 88 on the side. But these vent systems, these tubes right here would come over and hover over this, so the fumes of the machine gun could be vented out, and it wouldn't have to disturb the crew, because eventually, once you're shooting a lot and the gun is heating up and all of these rounds are being spent, it's going to be hell inside that confined area. And so the vent system for these pillboxes was key. So, and then of course you have the embouchure here, and then above his head you have the range card tacked to the wall right here. So the range card was basically a drawing of what this guy was looking at ahead of him. He has all the landmarks, the beach ahead of him, and then he would draw the distance of everything. So, okay, this is this distance, this is this distance, this is this, and he would mark various things on here. Usually he would draw photos of like what the silhouette of a specific tank or something looks like. That's for anti-tank crews. But he would draw various landmarks and then list on everything how far everything was. So he could look up, and if he saw targets moving at a certain position, he could look up and say, okay, that's such and such meters away. And so then he could immediately gauge it without having to worry, without having to guesstimate it. So German machine gunners along these the wall right here use these range cards a lot, and so did anti-tank crews. It's an integral part of these kind of crews here is a range card to show, you know, the distance of everything and where certain things are. So that's my illustration of one of these pillboxes. And these are some photographs that kind of show some similar things right here. Again, these are improvised. They're not you know, they're not using they are using a blueprint, but they're also just utilizing whatever they can do to make them. So you see them come in different shapes and sizes and such. So that's another example of one. Also, when this wasn't in use, as you can see right here, this guy has a big piece of wood that he's sitting on. That would have been covering the embouchure. Same thing goes with here. When this wasn't in use, you would have a big piece of wood covering this, and then the camouflage net would be covering it. So again, these positions, they don't want them to be spot. So, I mean, one thing that we've talked about a lot, Paul, that always pisses me off is like something, you know, yeah, you can see it in Saving Private Ryan, but then video games especially, where like German machine gun positions and bunkers and such, they're just these big edifices out in the open. And it's like, no, they wanted these things camouflaged. They did not want them to be seen. So with these improvised
we're back to the propaganda video. Yeah. When the Germans built the big stuff, like I don't know, U-boat pens, knowing that they are impregnable, they didn't give a shit about camouflage to some extent, although they did paint stuff on the roofs because they know it's impervious to bombs. But in the case of something made of bloody logs and earth, of course they're going to do their best to hide it, because one direct hit and it's gone. So yeah, again, we're often led into our understanding of Omaha because of movies, because of the documentaries, because of the imagery that is being shared with us that isn't necessarily representative.
That's right. Absolutely, man. And so, yeah, and that's when it comes to these pillboxes right here, they wouldn't have just been these log constructions out in the open. They would have been buried. Like, as you can see right here, this whole thing is buried. This whole thing is submerged into the earth. It's built into the escarpment. It's not meant to be seen. And this is also, just like we've talked about before, this is also enfilading fire. This is firing along the beach. This is not firing directly out to sea. This is firing sideways. So this guy right here would be shooting probably at guys, you know, closer to Les Moulins and stuff like that. Or not Les Moulins, sorry.
Yeah.
And there's just some detail right there of the position right here. Again, you can see this crate filling up with shells. You can see the pipe hovering over it. That's, you know, that's taking all the fumes from these rounds. The second right here coming up with the second magazine to attach it right here. So as you know, I'm a detail freak, but I whipped this up pretty quickly. I would have liked to given you a nice, you know, a traditional oil painting, but I didn't have time, unfortunately. This is all just Photoshop.
Yeah, we'll make do with that. It's, you know, it's below your normal standard. No, it's fantastic.
I say it is. Yeah. I say it is, but it's fun to do. You know, it is fun to do. Okay, so moving on to more about WN65 right here. Okay, so we got those machine gun positions established. Now, the real interesting thing is that there is another position left on the eastern side right there that is also enfilading, that appears to be similar or the same kind of thing as the machine gun pillboxes, but I don't believe it is. I've seen it listed as a machine gun pillbox, but I don't believe that is the case. if you remember right, we talked about the Pack 38 that was down on the beach when this whole thing was established, when it was established as WN28. The Pack 38 on that concrete platform. Now, again, they have the Schartenprogramm of late 1943 is passed, and so then the order is passed that, okay, all of your field guns, you can't have them out in the open anymore. You have to put them in a bunker. You have to put them in a casemate. And I was talking to some of the authors once of the Green Book about WN65 and about that Pack 38 position. And they say, well, according to some documents that they looked at, the Pack 38 was still part of WN65 once everything was pulled back to the plateau. But they didn't know where the hell the gun ended up. They told me, they're like, we've never been able to find out where the hell that gun is. We guess maybe it might be here. We can't see it in aerial photographs, really. We're kind of guessing. And that's just sometimes what you have to do. However, there is a testimony that is in Joseph Balkowski's Omaha Beach book by Captain Carroll Smith, who was of the 116th Infantry Division, the 29th ID, where he talks about when he was between exit E1 and exit E3, which is Les Moulins, he saw that an anti-tank gun atop the bluffs was shooting at them. He described it as an 88, but all American GIs refer to every gun as an 88. And he said that when he looked up, he said it was so well camouflaged, it was built into the plateau, but it was like built into the bluff, he said. And he said, oh, it was very well camouflaged, and we could see it shoot, and we could hear the round go past us and everything like that. So I believe that 5-centimeter Pack 38 is actually the far eastern position of WN65. It went from that concrete platform down on the beach up onto the plateau and into a log improvised position up on the plateau. And that's my own map of it right there. Yeah. But this right here is an actual aerial photograph of it. And from how it looks to me, I mean, this right here is the roof right here. This open area is probably where the shells would be collected, because these anti-tank guns, they have an automatic ejection system. Once they shoot their round, they just kick it out the back and they fly maybe like 10, 15 feet back. And that's what I think this open area is right here for those shells to land. So the whole interior is not filling up with heat and fumes and such, like we talked about with the improvised machine gun pillbox. And so when I look at this, it's like, that is probably what I believe that is what that is. That is that Pack 38 in an improvised log pillbox. And here is the blueprints for an improvised log pillbox for one of these kind of, or this is a field gun here, but the same kind of thing, you know, a big gun piece right here. And it's funny, in this blueprint right here, they show plans of how to install a chute to throw the rounds in so they don't collect inside the bunker. Now, from what I can tell in aerial photographs, I don't think that this position right here did not have something like this chute to throw these rounds out. That's why I think that there's that open area behind it, so those rounds could just fly out back into there rather than building this kind of chute to dispose of these rounds. But the rounds collecting all within the interior of the casemate is something they would not want. So that's why I believe that is a Pack 38 position of WN65. Okay, so yeah, going back to the Schartenprogramm of late 1943, the guns, you know, are ordered to take them out of their open positions and put them into casemates. I've already talked about that now. So the parish house that's at the foot of the WN65 bluff is demolished, and there are plans made to construct 2 R667 casemates to house 5-centimeter anti-tank guns at the foot of WN65. And that is a blueprint of an R667 casemate, German blueprint right there. Regelbau 667. All right. So, yeah, eventually, yeah, these are the construction on these does begin in 1944, from what I can tell, early 1944. Not a whole lot of development other than bringing everything onto the plateau happens in 1943, but in 1944. The casemates, you know, are starting to come up. So a rock conveyor is installed at the top of WN65 to bring stuff to and from the top of the bluff down to the bottom of it, from back and forth down to the construction sites right here where the two casemates are. Oh yeah, and also a water tank was installed behind the eastern casemate for mixing concrete. So the 5 centimeter KWK 39 L60 anti-tank gun that's in that ring stand position along the beach is taken from that ring stand and moved back into the casemate, the eastern casemate of WN65 right there. So when it comes to DDay, that ring stand down by the beach doesn't have anything in it. Unlike, let's say, the one at WN66, which still had it. The one at WN65 didn't have anything in it. In fact, I don't believe that you can still see in aerial photographs a number of these positions, like a number of these trenches and such, still there along the beach, but I don't believe that any of them were active on D-Day when it comes to WN65. I think at that point they had moved pretty much all of WN65 back up to the plateau. So the eastern R667 is finished on April 5th. The western R667 is scheduled to be finished on April 25th, but that was never met. Again, you can see the placement of these pillboxes right here. They're meant to fire along the beaches, enfilading fire. Again, not straight out to sea. So the east R667 casemate of WN65. Now, most people know this one. Again, if you've ever visited Omaha Beach, you've seen it. It's still there. It's a big monument now. This bunker was operational. It was functional, but in my opinion, it was not finished. And I'm going to get into why. So we talked about how the west R667 was not finished at all. It was still under construction. The eastern one, this one right here, it was, I guess you could say it was finished. You could use it, but it was not 100% finished. So one of the things that gives us away is that these types of casemates were meant to have an air filtration system inside them. They have these shafts built into them to install these fans on the inside that are operated by a crank with a big kind of vent that hovers over the gun. Again, because these things are having fumes come off them and such like that. That whole bunker is going to get full of these fumes and smoke and such. So the loader could reach back if that was happening and just crank this thing, and it would suck all of those fumes out. Well, the East R667 at WN65 never had one. It didn't have one installed. You can see in this photo right here, taken after D-Day, you can see the channel where the vent would come out, but there's nothing on it. If this was finished, it would have a pipe coming up here with a top on it, like how we looked at with the improvised casemate. And that's just not the case. This right here, these are blueprints for one of these fans right here that would be on the interior. It would be bolted to the wall with a crank. It'd be right next to the door, be bolted to the wall with this big cone kind of thing right here hovering over the gun. So when smoke and all this stuff starts to come off the gun, the loader can reach back and grab this crank and just, and it basically airs out the entire interior. Now, this photo right here is not the R667 of WN65. This is somewhere else. I forgot where this is located, but it shows remnants of one of these fans right here. This is another R667, and you can see the big suction fan right here. Part of it is still there. The actual device itself would have been sitting on the wall right here. You can see these 6 bolts that have been drilled into the concrete to mount this thing. And it would have the crank right here. The guy could just reach back and just crank it, and they would get the smoke out. But when it comes to, they're the bolts for the kind of thing. Again, when they were ready to install this, they would drill these bolts in there and then mount it on the wall. But the interior of the Eastern R667 at WN65 doesn't have them. This is the actual interior of that casemate at WN65. It doesn't have anything installed in terms of it doesn't have those bolts drilled on the wall. Now it has the shaft right here to vent that out that they put in there when they built the casemate. Obviously, it's part of the blueprints, but the bolts aren't installed. So I don't think at any point that that air filtration system was ever installed inside this casemate. I think that I don't think they ever got to that stage. Excuse me. So when this bunker would be in its completed stage, it would have this fan in there to where the gunner could do that to air it out, but it didn't have that. So technically, it's still technically not finished. Now, another thing that gives it away is that there's no steel door on the back. There are no photos that show the steel door at the back. When this thing was finished, it would have a steel door that would lock. And that's, again, another reason why they have those fans in there, is because the steel door is locked. Other than the embouchure, there's no real way to get air in there. So that's why they would have those fans in there to get all the gun fumes out, all the smoke and the fumes and all that stuff out. But I have not found one photo that shows the steel door on the rear of this bunker. Now, it does have the hinges embedded in the concrete to install the door, but there is no door. So it was intended to have a door, but they never got to that stage. Now, another thing that also gives this away is that you can see the whole bunker is kind of a dark color, and that's because it's coated in bitumen. Now, bitumen is a tar-like substance. It's meant to waterproof things. In fact, people still use it today on roofing and stuff like that. Yeah. But the Germans would use this on their fortifications when they would bury them. And it's so water doesn't seep into it and doesn't, there's no corrosion stuff. They use it on metal and concrete. So when you see German bunkers that are coated in this black stuff, that's bitumen coating. I've seen some people say that this is camouflage paint. It's actually not. It's bitumen. It's a tar-like substance to keep this bunker watertight. And again, they would coat the bunkers in this stuff when they knew they were going to bury them. So if they knew the whole bunker was going to be buried in dirt, they would coat it in bitumen. And as you can see on the R667, only that
was going to be covered.
Only the parts of it that were going to be buried are covered in bitumen. There's none on this side or anything like that, or none on the little hallway right here to go inside. So eventually the bunker was intended to be like this. This is my own Photoshop mock-up right here of what the intended final result would be, which would be this almost completely buried position right here. So
Neil is adding this. We've got questions building up for later, but Neil is adding armored parts and lots of the fittings were usually responsibility of the fortress engineers, not the building troops organization top. So it's not, it's a job's worth, not my job. The guys doing the construction aren't necessarily in charge of that. So thanks for that detail, Neil. It's brilliant stuff.
Yeah, exactly. More interesting parts of it. I didn't even touch on that, but that is true. But yeah, so this is what the final result would have been if the Germans had completed this. It would have had that air filtration system. It would have had a steel door on the back, and it would have been buried like this into the hill, so you couldn't even see it. Now, you would also have, as you can see on this bunker, it has those hooks along the top and the back. It would probably, more than likely, if it was finished, have a camouflage net covering the embouchure when it wasn't in use. That once it would be in use, they would throw the camouflage net off it. Yeah. But from what I can tell, there was never any camouflage net on this position. So here's another thing I decided to do for this show, is do another cutaway. I did one for the improvised pillbox. Now I wanted to do one for an actual concrete fortified position. This one is of the famous R667 casemate of WN65 we were just looking at. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of how this thing operated. It would only be operated by two people. It wasn't a big bunker full of 5, 6, 7, 8 guys. There would only be two guys in there. It would be the gunner, who you can barely see in my illustration right here, sitting in his seat of the gun right here, looking through an eyepiece, which is the same kind of eyepiece you would have on a Pak 38, operating the gun. And then you would have the loader right here. And it would be his job to obviously load the gun and then extract all of the spent shells through this chute that's at the very back right here. If you go in there today, you can see there's this hole in the wall with this ramp that goes back. And that's so the loader can take the spent shells and just throw them out. And there's a little space back here in the wall where they would land. They don't want them obviously they don't want them just piling up all over the place on the inside. So yeah, that's what that hole in the back of the wall is for, is to throw these spent rounds out, which is what this guy is doing right here. Also, you can see the holes cut in the wall right here, or the holes, the pipes, the shafts for that air filtration system. There's one right here, and then there's another one right here where if they had finished it, the air filtration system would be mounted on the wall with one pipe going out this way and then one pipe coming out this way. They never got to that stage, but the bunker was built with those shafts, so it was eventually intended to have that. And then the steel door, of course, isn't there because that was never part of it either. And then you can obviously see the bitumen coating right here on the side. Now, this bunker, like a lot of these bunkers, was not just solid poured concrete, but most of it was concrete blocks. A lot of it was. The majority of the side facing the ocean is concrete blocks when you look at it today. So you can see all this right here is a big outline of concrete blocks. And then the area right above the embouchure there are also a lot of concrete blocks. But there is also a lot of poured concrete. Most of the inside of it is poured concrete.
I call it an interim one myself. I say it's in between the 42 where it is generally all poured concrete and the really late ones where it's just block. It's kind of halfway between.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And then, but you still do have all of the reinforcing bars in there and such. Unfortunately, these were not when I drew this. These were not based on actual plans of how the Germans used rebar. So I'll have to update it eventually. But it just gives you the idea that this entire structure is full of rebar. So yeah, that is my illustration of how the R667 casemate of WN65 operated. Even though it technically was not complete, it was operational and it did operate on D-Day. So that's just some more detail. And you can also see when you walk into this bunker, there's this space down here on the floor just to the right. And that's where they would have the cases for the anti-tank rounds all stacked in there. So the guys could pull out these transit cases that would all be, stacked up in there, and that's how they would get their rounds. So the Western R667 casemate of WN65 never finished, only half complete, if that. This is a photograph taken after D-Day. This is as far as they got with it. They have the rebar skeleton, they have some of the concrete blocks, and some false work, some wooden false work here, but that's about it. They never got to the stage where they could actually pour the concrete into it. And there is no gun inside it at all. And I have the R667 of the eastern side, that utilized the gun that was down on the beach, the one that was in that ring stand position. I have no idea where the gun for this one would have come from. They would have had to get it from, they would have had to get it from some other position. I don't know what their plans were, but they were planning on building another one of these at some point. And that's the rear of it. And even though this is far from being complete, you can see they were starting to slap that bitumen coating on it as well. So they're just starting to do a little bit of a little layer to get it started. Okay. So in the spring of 1944, So the casemates are under construction, and in the spring of 1944, the anti-tank ditch is dug and filled with water that cuts across the Ruquet Valley in a zigzag pattern. Again, we've seen that at Les Moulins. The same thing happens at La Ruquet. They dig this massive trench and then have it filled with water that all comes from the Ruquet Canal that cuts through the center of it. That fills up with water. They can have that fill up with water once the tide comes in, and then they can have that water all fill up into that ditch. Panzerabwehrspitzgraben is what the Germans called these anti-tank ditches, and that's a diagram of how to build these things. And then also, different types of barbed wire are utilized. Kropenzone, also known as the paddock fence barbed wire. That is the Roman ruins right there, not WN65, but it shows this same type of barbed wire that was used, pickets with the zigzag kind of barbed wire. It's known as the paddock fence. And then you have the stolperdraht, which is tripwire. And a lot of this is found along the anti-tank ditch of WN65. So when guys are running across, the valley right here, they could install this tripwire here that makes it very difficult for people to move across. So the Germans use this a lot around various positions of their nests. You can see some of this around WN60 on the far eastern side of Omaha Beach, but it was also used here at La Ruquet. And you can see, this is a photo right here of the actual anti-tank ditch, and you can see some of that tripwire here put on the seaside of the anti-tank ditch. So not fun at all. And then another aspect of La Ruquet is the MF11 minefield that is installed at some point in 1944. Now, I haven't been able to pinpoint the specific area where all of these mines were laid, but according to Americans who were in this area, there were mines all over the place. That's one of the things when you read about the Americans taking the positions WN64.
Yeah, it's consistent amongst B Company 16th, right up to all those units like in Spalding and minefields.
Yeah, so the minefield, so the MF11 minefield around La Ruquet must have been pretty extensive, because all of the accounts that I've read from Americans just say that mines were all over the place, S mines and bouncing up and things like that. So I haven't been able to pinpoint where all of them were, but I plan to eventually. So, and then another thing about WN65 is that there is an anti-tank gun installed at the very rear of the nest. Now, this was not an anti-tank gun from the actual troops who were occupying WN65. The troops that were occupying the nest, the static infantry, were from the 10th Company of Grenadier Regiment 726, the 716th Infantry Division. But in May 1944, the 352nd arrived, and they started reinforcing the areas and putting their own stuff up in there. And the 14th Company, the anti-tank company of Grenadier Regiment 916, added their own piece to WN65, which was a Pack 40 anti-tank gun, 7.5 centimeter Pack 40 anti-tank gun, inside an improvised log casemate at the rear of the nest. And then off to the side, you have an air raid trench and a shelter right there. So if the crew had to get under cover, they could just run into this trench that's set up across the road. And again, that's that same blueprint of the improvised log casemate. So at the rear of WN65, you had one of these anti-tank guns by the Grenadier Regiment 916 from the 352nd Infantry Division. And the 352nd Infantry Division, they also took up a lot of other positions around WN65. I don't think they took up any positions around WN64. I can't see any evidence of that, but there are many slit trenches and such that you can see in aerial photographs around WN65, or Schützenlöcke is the German word for that, around WN65. And there's some more that are on the escarpment looking out to sea right there. Those don't show up in aerial photographs before May 1944.
I'm wondering whether there's the increase in minefields on the 64 side of the joys because they haven't finished the bunkers. Maybe they're trying to sort of herd an attacking force into the fields of fire of the 65 guns. I'm just kind of spitballing about.
Possible. It's definitely possible. Yeah, I don't know. That's one thing to consider. Because WN64, it's not very big. I think that there were only like 10 soldiers there who were manning the position. So that could be the case to where they're putting so many resources into WN65. They're building those two big casemates, which were, the eastern one was finished before the R612 at WN64. So that could be the case. So we need to compensate for the lack of development. We need to put up more mines around them. I don't know. It's, a good source to look at when it comes to some of the stuff that WN64 is also Spalding of the first ID, because he came through WN64 on D-Day. I don't know, an interesting thing to think about. So by D-Day, June 6, 1944, this is what the Ruquet Valley looked like. So we went from 1942 all the way to 1944. And now you have all of the beach obstacles. Here's the line of Czech hedgehogs, and then you have the Hemmenbalk, the log ramps back here. So that's basically, this is what the Americans would have been facing on D-Day. And these are some aerial photographs taken May 19th, 1944 from a Lockheed. We're going from west to east in these photos. So we can see the escarpment of WN65 right here. And these are a number of the positions that we already talked about. This is them pointed out, looking at them from this plane right here. You can see the rock conveyor where all of this material would go to and from. MG pillbox number 1 right here. Again, that's its field of fire. MG pillbox number 2, that's its field of fire. And then the Pack 38 position right here. Again, bigger embouchure opening right here for that gun. Going back to the photos, we're going to continue to move east, and we can see La Abricatière still there. And we can see the Western R667 Casemate here still under construction. And then the East R667 Casemate over here, probably finished at this point. Again, well, not finished as we talked about, but probably functional at this point. And then the construction site for WN65 over here, next to that stucco house of the parish house that we mentioned when we started right here. That stucco house, or that little stucco shed, remains there all up until D-Day. And this is WN64 from the same photograph. We can see the position for the Soviet gun right here, and then the construction site for the R612 right over here. Never finished, still just in that skeleton phase. And then the enfilading MG pillbox, which seemed to be a bit larger from the ones at WN65 over here, facing the east. Going back to the photos, and we continue on. Now, this is one of the only photos of La Ruquet, probably the most famous photo of La Ruquet that was actually taken on D-Day. You see this photo online a lot. It's a famous photo. But in the background right here, this is La Ruquet. This is the Ruquet Valley right here. So you have WN64 up here and then WN65 on the other side. This photo was taken around a little later in the day, around a little past noon on D-Day. So these are some photos taken of the positions after D-Day. This is WN64. This is a good photo of the incomplete R612 casemate. Again, you have all those blocks, those concrete blocks with the rebar and then false work wood, not even close to being finished. And then that's the Soviet M1927 gun right there. That's a good photo of the Soviet gun that was in that, filling that role as the anti-tank gun or the field gun for that nest. I don't know if it was going to be used or not inside that casemate, but it was there on D-Day. And that's the Zwillingsockel 36 position of WN64. This photo, along with some other ones that we're going to look at, was taken by Stuart Brandel. And when he took these photographs, I have his entire album. When he took these photographs, he listed on aerial photographs where each one was taken. So we know specifically that this was actually the gun at WN64 because he pinpointed it on a map in his notes. So those photos are great. He took a lot of great photos, but what's even better is that he pinpoints on his maps where he took these photos on Omaha Beach. So this is the Zwillingsockel 36 on WN64. The MG34s have been taken out. I would assume they were probably there on D-Day because you have the ammo still sitting in here. I don't think they would have ammo sitting in there if it wasn't operational. And then you have a bunch of grenades laying on the floor here, ready to throw too. They have the caps pulled off them with the ball coming out, so they're ready to throw them if they had to. This is the mortar position for the Brandt MLE 2731 at WN64, the French mortar. And you can see that in this mortar pit, they have all of these. We were talking about range cards earlier. They have all of these lined up in here. So the mortar crew can, if they're getting certain coordinates, let's say, hey, fire on this position. They just look over to this and sight their mortar for whatever is listed on here. So another good way, to quickly just throw the gun into operation. And then this right here is is for storing the rounds. You see these interesting kind of ammunition storage units along these positions. They have these big, thick concrete doors that fold shut. And that would be called a munition sablage, which is just, to store ammo. But that specific kind you see a lot along Omaha Beach. You see more of those at WN62 as well. That is the improvised MG pillbox of WN64. Unfortunately, this photo has been listed as being Major Werner Plutzgat's position on D-Day. It's actually not. You can't see it because I had to crop this photo to fit in here, but you can actually see in the background La Abricatière on the beach. So this is actually WN64. This is the improvised machine gun pillbox enfilading that's facing east of WN64. So that's La Abricatière after D-Day. It's completely destroyed, probably taken out by tanks on D-Day because the Germans, as we talked about when we did our Les Moulins one, and we also did WN62, the Americans, they shot at all the buildings, once they were on the beach. So this one right here, definitely, La Abricatière definitely received it. And you can see the remnants of the observation post still on top right here. This platform right here is the German observation post that was installed up there in 1943. So unfortunately, La Abricatière was destroyed, but parts of it were still there after D-Day. And that's the rear of it right there. You can see one of the rounds went right through the building. That's another photo of it. In this photo, you can actually see the old machine gun Tobruk right over here off to the right. It's not buried anymore because the Germans weren't using it. So it's just kind of sitting out in the open, but it's still, it's right there just in front of La Abricatière. And then this is another famous photo of German prisoners after D-Day taking their wounded to be put on American ships and taken back to England. This is La Ruquet. This is WN65 back here. You can see the R667 casemate right here. It's another photo. This is a famous photo of the R667 casemate. Again, you see that defined bitumen coating right there on the right there. That tar substance that's made to make it watertight. All of these scabs right here on the corner are from a 50 caliber machine gun from a half track of the AA crew that came ashore on D-Day that took out this bunker. The same with this right here. This is from a 37 millimeter gun that eventually took this out.
Hyman Haas fired the 37 and Dal Estes was the 50 cal. Yeah, lovely guys.
Exactly. Yep. So all of these right here are 50 cal hits, and you can see more on the interior of the bunker if you go in there today, which I have never been inside, but I have seen many, many photographs of the interior and studied it thoroughly. Someday I hope to be inside there. This right here is this big gash on the top is apparently from a 5-inch shell fired by the USS Frankfurt on D-Day that nailed the top of the bunker. So significant damage there, and you can see some of the rebar sticking out. And that's another famous photo of the R667.
Yeah.
And this is the rear. You can see the channel there for that air filtration system. You can see the bitumen coating again is placed on areas that would be buried, and the areas that aren't buried are not do not have bitumen coating on them. And that's the rear of it. And this is the interior. This is where this gun was taken out. The gunner of this piece would have been sitting right here. This is his seat right here. So when this thing was hit, I mean, he was just obliterated.
If he was there, which we assume he was, he's gone. Yeah, he didn't make it.
Right. Well, Hyman Haas, and I'm pretty sure it's also mentioned in another AAR, says that after they fired at that bunker, a German was coming out with blood coming out of his ears and coughing up blood. And so, I mean, it sounds like the crew was inside there when they hit it.
I assume so. Yeah.
Devastating. That's the West R667 casemate. Incomplete. On the barbed wire fence that's lining the anti-tank ditch, we have a minefield sign. I would think that is probably a decoy sign. It seems like the minefield was mostly in the valley itself. This, to me, feels more like a decoy sign. That's because it's facing the actual ocean. It's not like, really turned so anyone that's around the nest can see it. So the Germans actually did put up decoy minefield signs, and I haven't any confirmation, but it's possible that could be what that is. So that's the Western R667 Casemate, again, incomplete. All this construction material sitting around it. And then this is the escarpment of WN65, and this is another photograph that's taken by Stuart Brandel, and he actually, these numbers are not added by me. He wrote those numbers on the photograph. Those are those improvised gun positions that we talked about. Those are the two machine gun pillboxes, and then that is the Pack 38 position right there on the far right. And then that's the anti-tank ditch filled with water. You can see the barbed wire here, the pickets. Again, pickets used a lot. And then that's that same photo of the anti-tank ditch where you can see the tripwire. This is the end, the eastern end of the anti-tank ditch. And you actually can see WN64 right here. You can see some parts of that R612 bunker that's up there. This is on the escarpment of WN65, kind of looking down. That's the back of the R667 Casemate right there. Americans occupying the area. You can see the back of the Casemate right there. And, you know, one of the most famous photographs that everyone seems to know. The second ID after D-Day moving up the escarpment of WN65. And you can see the back of the R667 Casemate right there in the background. And then the stucco shed that was left there.
You didn't mention the Springfields. I thought a weapons guy like you, I know Marty Morgan, but I thought you'd mentioned the Springfields there on those second division guys.
Paul, we're talking about German concrete. We're not talking about Americans.
I thought you're going to not miss a chance to go down that little rabbit hole.
We'll do another show. We'll talk all about D-Day landing equipment and such like that. Yeah. But that's right. You are correct. Yeah, these guys got Springfield 03s right here, which is a really cool detail. I mean, I love my M1 Garand, but you know, it is cool to acknowledge that the Springfield.
I met one of the guys in that column. He's a bit further down years ago, and he told me how there was a correspondent setting and staging that photo up, and there he had bods down the beach, and he had actually set it up to have the V pointing to the right, the column coming up from the beach up there, then converging with the column, you know, the back end of the column there, so that it did point towards Germany. It was all, you know, it was an artistic creation. Right, because that's not the way you'd walk men up. When I'm standing with you there and you wanted to move men inland quickly, walk up the bloody road that's just over to the right, be out as a shot there. Don't go up that stupid path there.
Yeah,
it's staged. It's staged.
Oh, it absolutely is. Well, I like some of the looks on the faces of the guys too. Like this guy right here, he's like, "What are we doing? Like, are we done with this crap?"
Well, that's what the guy told me. He said because the photographer shouted out to them, "Your mothers will understand why I've done this when she sends you the cuttings, the newspapers in 2 months' time." So that's what he shouted back to these guys, because he said we were all going past, you know, muttering our objections to going up this stupid route there, because he said we had to just, after we got past the photographer, we had to loop back on to the main road. We didn't carry on going up the path. We just kind of went off behind the cameraman, and then someone else that navigated us back to the main road. It was completely contrived.
God, I love stuff like that. And again, it's something you never, you know, it needs to be talked about more. You know, that all of the staged photographs, you know, we could do a whole episode on staged photographs. But that's a good one to add because it's a famous photo. But and this is almost kind of from the same position on top of the escarpment of WN65. We can see the Casemate down there, the one that was incomplete, and then La Abricatière still there. Sitting there completely damaged, but that's a top. And then these are some of the trenches atop WN65. What's really cool is that we can see some of the camouflage techniques that the Germans were using. This is all kind of chewed up now, but you can see they would use these hemisphere almost kind of poles, these semicircular little rods right here, placed all over the top of the trench, and then cover that with grass and such. That was one way they would camouflage their nets. And this right over here is one of those shelters. You can see it's completely made out of logs, the log roof and all that stuff. And then over here would be one of the machine gun positions. And this is the photograph I was telling you about, where you can see right here, right here, right here, and right here. These are magazines for a French Mac 31 machine gun. So this over here, this pillbox over here, must have housed one of these guns. Otherwise, why would all of these French Mac 31 machine guns be magazines be laying all over the place, all over here? So that's my evidence. I wasn't just bullshitting when I put that gun in my illustration.
Yeah.
Moving on. And then this is the improvised Pac 40 bunker at the rear of WN65. This is the rear of the bunker. You can see, again, log roof buried into the terrain. There's some French civilians coming up to see what's all going on. Rare photo I was able to find of the front of the bunker with the Pac 40, 2 Americans standing next to it. And this kind of shows how it was constructed. You can see all of these logs that they were able to build out of it. This is the interior of that Pac 40 bunker. This is the gun itself. And this is a similar photo. This is a more famous photo. But this is the Pac 40 position at the rear of WN65. And you can see all of the Ruquet Valley right here. This is one of the guns from the 916th Grenadier Regiment 916. And
it came up in a cyber, I think it was History Explorer and some other people who visited there, is, of course, well, you'll find out yourself when we're there together, Michael, is that the sand dunes are a good 15, 20 feet higher on that stretch of the beach now. So when you're standing anywhere in those bunkers now, you just don't have the line of sight that the guns would have had back then, so it's, you have to kind of explain the theory of the 467th anti-aircraft machine gun fire coming from the half tracks and the angles of the fire, because it's the views have changed. If you stand there and think, why the hell are the Germans built it there? You can't see anything. But at the time, of course, it was really good.
At the time, yeah. And that's why it's important to study things like photographs and maps and such, because it lists those details if you want to go back to that and say, well, at the time, it would have been like this.
Yeah.
So that's my presentation. That's my presentation of La Ruquet. If you want to further discuss my maps, which I have here all listed out, and then my illustrations, you can always email me. And then, I just launched a GoFundMe to help me finally do my Normandy trip. I just launched this GoFundMe campaign. I'm gonna work on it. I haven't released a video yet or anything, but I just started it. And Paul already mentioned it.
You're up to $475 so far.
I'm up.
So
what?
You're $475. You're 37% there in an hour and a half. So that's not bad.
Holy shit.
Yeah, well, they're a loyal bunch, the World War II TV crowd. So no, absolutely fantastic stuff. And there's a couple of comments and questions that we'll follow up on. So John Sowerby asked a very good point when you were talking about the development of somewhere like 64 and 65. Were positions like Hillman built up in the same way, piece by piece? And it's a massive, great rabbit hole. But in the case of Hillman, that was very much a very important strategic position, kind of built in one go. So it depends on what priority the Germans are giving these locations. You get the continually added, amended, improved, and then you get the straight out of the box because they consider it a priority. So the answer is it varies. Is that one? So that's the comment there. Lots of comments about how much ammunition will be in these bunkers. So Peter O'Connell, how well supplied with ammo of 64 and 65, and also the number of people, how many defenders. So we're back into that. We can only know to a certain level of detail. Thanks to Niels, we have some information and some of the people who've written about it. But what's your take on that?
Well, WN65, from what I've been able to determine, when it comes to the men of the static troops of that nest on D-Day, the number seems to come around to 15. That's what I've seen in documents, like 15 static troops of WN65. However, you also got to remember that men of Grenadier Regiment 916 are also occupying that area. We saw those foxholes and such like that. So it's somewhere along those lines, probably like 20 to 30 to maybe even 40 men, if that. Not a whole lot. And again, WN64, I think the documents say in terms of the static troops about 10 troops maybe. So not a whole lot. Yeah, it's not in the it's not in the triple digits. It's definitely not in the triple digits. So, um, yeah, so that's what I've been able to find. It's like in terms of static infantry, WN65 seem to have the most, and I think the number is around 15. That's what I've been able to find. WN64, going back to Spalding's testimony, he claimed that when they went through there, a lot of those guys were Polish. A lot of those guys were Polish conscripts who were at WN64, and that they would immediately give up. And once they finally confronted him, we would immediately be like, "I'm not German. I'm not German. I'm not German."
And that goes up to WW2TV as well, because Frank Stroini, Raymond Frank Stroini, he ended up, I think I may have done this story before, he ended up meeting a Polish guy, because he was Stroini, he's obviously Polish himself. He ended up meeting a Polish German soldier who knew his parents. They'd grown up on the same street, and I'm going to say Warsaw, but it could have been Krakow or somewhere else. And so there, for whatever reason, there was a lot of Polish people in that Polish static troops. So that's interesting. There's a couple of comments about the variety of weaponry used, which comes up each time you've come on. So, Mr. Frickin' Frackin', how in the world would they keep the ammo organized for this weaponry? Sir Capo, why didn't the Germans use guns intended for infantry use? Is coming up as well. And then Peter, all these various weapons and calibers must have driven German logistics guys to drink. And they're all basically saying the same thing. And of course, as we've talked about before, that is the problem that is plaguing the German army right now. The frontline troops are requesting the up-to-date modern weapon systems that they are to some extent receiving, and to some extent they're not receiving them also. But the further down the list of priorities, the more, we said it earlier, Michael, they're just having to deal with whatever the hell they've got. And when you look at, there's that bit of pencil writing inside the ammunition bunker in Widerstands's 73. And some guys obviously trying to work out, there's like 12 different types of box he's trying to sort out. Okay, so do I put that one on the top? Oh, is the image frozen a second? No. Because it was obviously a nightmare. There's that thing with the British Army that if you've got Bren's and Leonfield number 4s, it's just 303, and you got the Americans, it's boxes and boxes of 30 caliber ammunition. And okay, we're talking about small arms there, but it was a nightmare for them, and thank God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, there's a great photo. We didn't look at it here, but there's a great photo that I have of taken after D-Day, where American engineers are going through a whole bunch of German ammunition off Omaha Beach. It's somewhere along Omaha Beach, because you can tell they're the 6th, or they're the 6th ESB, and you see a giant pile of Czech ammunition crates, like Czech rounds with Czech writing on the sides of them. So it's like they're not only bringing the guns there, but they're also bringing all the ammunition from various countries and such. And it is a logistical and nightmare when it comes to that sort of thing. And when it came to a lot of these pillboxes and such, people saying, what about the ammunition, such like that? These trenches had what they called munition sablage units in them, and they would hold ammo inside there, and it was inside the trench. They weren't necessarily inside the pillboxes themselves, but they were close to it, so they could run out of the pillbox, go to that compartment, grab a box of ammo, and run back. And usually they could hold like a machine gun one, they could hold like maybe 4, 5, or 6 cans of ammo, and each of those cans have about like 50 rounds in them or so, if that, like maybe a little bit more. So I mean, so not a whole lot.
No, I mean, Sir Capo again said, what actual strategic effect does minute differences in small arms have? And I think it's about muscle memory, isn't it? It's about, in high stress situations, if you're the guy who has to ferry ammunition from gun A, or ammunition dump B to gun A, and you've got 3 or 4 different types of ammunition to get there, and you've got to run back and forth. When there's stress, and when there are shells falling, when there's naval shells firing over your head, and you're seeing an armada of hundreds of landing craft ahead of you, it's all just that making sure you pick up the right one and getting the right one to the right person. You say, no, not that box. And so it was obviously difficult just to store it in the first place. But I can only imagine when push comes to shove, and there's a din of noise around you, of course it's going to cause problems. Of course it's just going to end up, you grab the wrong tools, and that's not just ammunition. It's of course the standard repair to the weapons. It's all the different jamming procedures you've got to have memorized. And if the guy who was the assistant gunner on the French machine gun has been wounded, so you call the guy over who's the assistant machine gunner who survived from a Czech gun. He doesn't necessarily know the stoppages on that gun. It's potentially a nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and also we're talking about, like, again, the static unit that's here, the 716th. Again, a lot of like Polish, guys who have been folded into this unit. Big language barrier there as well.
Yeah,
exactly. It's a nightmare. It's a European hodgepodge of confusion.
Yeah. So the last couple of things. Well, Terry Down asked, what the R612 Casemate have been armed with had it been fished? Do we have any idea what would have gone in there?
What is it called? FK235, I believe. I'll have to look into that, but it can be various types of things, but it's intended for a 75 millimeter gun.
Yeah.
So,
and then Gary Giamara made the comment. It's clear that the later the invasion, the stronger the coast defenses. Before late 43, they were far weaker, and significant strengthening occurred just weeks before the 6th of June. Including German ground units. And that is broadly true, except I would argue, and John Sowerby responded to that saying, except as much as it wasn't fully finished or completely in place by the time of D-Day. So if I was a German commander, I would rather have an older finished position with all the infrastructure I need for that, probably, than a half-finished new system. So it's better the devil you know, isn't it? In some cases, it's why the second infantry are still carrying 03 Springfields, because as a division, or at least the regiment concerned, they were offered the M1 Garand like 2 weeks before D-Day or something, and they decided, look, it's too late now to change over everything we've been working. We've been working on putting down a base of fire with our set of weapons, and what we will do is we will phase in the M1s with the new guys, and that's what they did in Normandy. So yes, potentially they're building better stuff, but the variables are: is the concrete as good as the earlier concrete? Are they going to get the weapon that they're going to receive in it? What are the caliber of troops that are going to be defending the weapon? Has the construction of the earlier set of defenses got in the way of the construction of the new defense? There's so many variables.
Yes.
No,
but it's it's interesting because there is along Omaha Beach, we could talk about all the other landing beaches as well, but along Omaha Beach, not one of those German resistance nests was finished. Every single one of them was under construction. And people, I find that Americans especially love to talk about underdog scenarios and such like that, and things. But like when you look at you're talking about the Springfields, with and stuff like that. When you look at the Americans compared to like the German units that were at Omaha Beach, like the Germans were using a lot of stuff that was obsolete, old, and all kinds of things. They were much more underdogs when it came to all of their equipment than the Americans were.
And it didn't work. I mean, the very fact is the Atlantic Wall at most bought a few hours on some of the beaches, and at worst bought a few minutes for the Germans inland and artillery units to get themselves together. But basically, all this much vaunted, interlocked, crisscrossing, interconnected, organized infrastructure of defenses did not meet its basic job requirement. It failed at its first and only hurdle. And despite the fact we've talked about it a lot, the enduring, as you say, the underdog mentality, the movies, the video games, there's an idea of what happened on Omaha Beach that is only partially grounded in what actually occurred at Omaha Beach. And when you're thinking about these interlocking fields of fire, when you think about the number of naval barrels that are hurling lumps of metal at that for hours on the morning of June the 6th, I mean,
Yeah, it is. It's more one sided than people think, you know, when it comes to it. But fascinating as well, because again, it's something that not a lot of people consider, and that's part of my goal with this sort of stuff is that I just want people to see it for what it is. You know, I just want people to see it for what it is. I don't want myths and legends to continue on. You know, I want the truth to be more mainstream.
Well, as you said, and we will bring things to an end, is that the documentaries use the same old footage, the same old photos. And as you began this presentation, there is a wealth of photographic evidence about this area from both the German period, the early period, the mid period, the late period, and then from post D-Day as well, from all angles, plus the information, plus the plans, plus the maps, plus the overlays, plus the Google Earth, plus the fact we can look around the locations now. It's really possible to build up a very, very detailed set of diagrams about exactly what was defending Omaha Beach now. And so there's no excuse for these documentary makers to use the footage of the Todd battery up in the Pas-de-Calais to illustrate Omaha. They can use the guns that they are there, but of course it doesn't fulfill what they're trying to do. They're presenting Darth Vader as the German defenses so that Luke Skywalker, the plucky young American, can overcome the Death Star. That's basically the story the documentaries are saying, isn't it? I think
it is, and I say fuck that.
Yeah, fuck that. Yeah, let's fuck that. And that's so well, folks. You know what to do in terms of the GoFundMe. We will make sure we can do that. We're going to offer Michael a place on our October World War II TV tour. Only one day on Omaha, but you get to see some other stuff inland as well. And you can go. We'll drop you there overnight, and you can walk around at your heart's content.
Please do
with a flashlight or whatever. So brilliant stuff. So folks, as always, click like and subscribe. I may do an Ask Me Anything tomorrow night, and then if not, it'll be Neil Cherry coming on Wednesday to talk about Death Railway. I'm still trying to work on something Operation Veritable for Friday. I'm not sure about that yet. Things are going on. But anyway, thanks everybody for your fantastic questions, and I will see you all again. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.